Nick Corsiniti has written some of the best reporting on what is actually in these state-by-state bills, all predicated on a lie that somehow there was fraud. There was no fraud. The very few occasions of fraud, I think, are mostly on the Trump side of the ledger. And I wonder if you could just take us through your reporting from the weekend.
So I was down in Georgia last week, where a lot of attention's been played on these the omnibus voter bills that have provisions that restrict voting and also will impact the administration of elections. But in Georgia, there were a lot of smaller bills that dealt with county election boards, and these are the officials who really determine how voting will take place. They select polling locations, they set the voting hours. While they still have to meet minimums, they can decide if they want to add an additional weekend day of voting in Georgia. And what we saw with a lot of these smaller bills that didn't get a lot of attention was that county boards of elections were being restructured. And the groups that were going to be allowed to restructure them and given them the permission to install their own people in it have been these county boards of commissioners, which are partisan bodies. And in a lot of the counties that I looked at and that I visited, they were all controlled by Republicans. So what we started to see was this is kind of the first place that these voting laws that have been passed pretty much since March are starting to take effect. And this is the first real world impact that we've seen. And what it means is there's going to be not as much voice and advocacy for people of color. At least 5 of the county board of election commissioners who are being removed were women of color. So their voice will be lost. Others who might know a little bit more about their individual community's needs when it comes to voting won't be able to have their voices heard on these boards. And it risks kind of undermining the very rhythms of Election Day.
I want to read some of exactly what you're referring to. It takes the people who turned out to be the heroes in 2020. They were Democrats and Republicans, but they were election officials who sought to do exactly what you're describing, defend the ultimate result of the will of the voters. And it wasn't even whole states. It was usually a precinct or a county. They were the people strong-armed by reporting from some of your colleagues, by Donald Trump from the Oval Office in Michigan, Georgia, and other places. Let me read some of what these laws would do. You write this about Georgia. Across Georgia, members of at least 10 county election boards have been removed, had their position eliminated, or are likely to be kicked off through local ordinances or new laws passed by the state. At least 5 are people of color, and most are Democrats, though some are Republicans, and they will most likely all be replaced by Republicans. GOP lawmakers say the new measures are meant to improve the performance of local boards and reduce the influence of the political parties. But the laws allow Republicans to remove local officials they don't like. And because several of them have been black Democrats, voting rights groups fear that these are further attempts to disenfranchise voters of color. Just on the bogus nature of their claim here, Nick, that they're saying they're meant to improve the performance of local boards, the Georgia vote was audited 3 times. There were no miscounting. The machines didn't miscount. The hand recounts affirmed all of the counts of the state. Why not be upfront about the motives here?
Well, this is kind of the same, reason and motives that Republicans have been giving around the country, which is this idea that elections need to be secure, even if they already were secure. Even when they don't promote and talk about the big lie, they're saying, like we could take Florida, for example. Every Republican in Florida who voted for their bill that adds new restrictions to voting says that Florida's election was the gold standard in 2020. We had no issues, and they admit that. But then they say it can always be stronger and more secure. And that's kind of how they've rationalized some of these new voting restrictions. But what they're kind of doing is not necessarily weighing the impact that it will have on voters and making it harder to vote. If we look at Georgia, one of the new provisions in the voting law there is voter ID and some new requirements for voter ID. And a really impressive investigative report in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution found that 272,000 Georgians didn't have the requisite either ID or information that they would need to give the Secretary of State's office. So they'd have to provide new information to vote. And they might not know that they're short of that. Now, more than half of that 272,000 were black voters. So in doing this kind of attempt to secure an already secure election, they've added these new restrictions on voting that could really impact people's ability to vote. Atlanta has a mayoral election this year. and then in 2022.
Nick, you've been covering this, I think the longest. I've been reading your reporting on this the longest. Can you rank sort of which of the laws in your mind are the worst and which go the farthest to doing what you report on here, disempowering the kinds of local election officials who walk that line in November?
Well, when it comes to, say, like a partisan power grab of election administration, I think Georgia is probably going to have the greatest takeover just in the totality of bills. You have the main omnibus voting bill, which stripped the Secretary of State of his power. He was no longer a voting member on the State Board of Elections, which sets budgets and a bunch of election administration duties. He was also removed from the board. So when you take that with the county election officials being removed and boards being restructured, I think you might see the greatest partisan power grab of elections in Georgia. Now, if we were to look at which of these bills is necessarily going to have the most restrictive impacts, it was going to be Texas. The bill in Texas that kind of died by a dramatic late night walkout by state Democrats, but will come back up again in a special session, would have probably directly disenfranchised a number of voters in the tens of thousands. They were going to ban drive-through voting, which was used by 127,000 people. They were going to ban 24-hour voting, which in one night allowed about 14,000 people to vote. So just those two things on top of similar restrictions we've seen on ballot collection, on weekend voting hours, and on ID requirements would have really led to some pretty harsh restrictions on voting that definitely would have impacted turnout. That bill in some form is likely to come up again in Texas.